welcome. Good that you're all still here, because it must be a lot of information that's coming to you. So I will take it a little bit easy on you. The story I will tell today is just a very personal story, very much based on my practice and things that I've experienced. And I've also, I want to focus a little bit on the historic, I have this historical perspective from landscape architecture and then reclamation projects. And I think the landscape urbanism origins from the landscape architectural approach that was developed around the Second World War in the Netherlands. Especially, or in the Netherlands, I cannot speak for maybe in the United States, it's the same. But and I also want to talk about like how to deal with the soil and the water, the geographical or the geographic conditions of the landscape, how you can use them, and maybe how you can also totally ignore them, which is also mostly the case actually, unfortunately. So well, when I was a student, I was teaching by Meto Vroon. He was mentioned by the first lecture, and that we always had to look at the soil, the water system, the vegetation, and then the cultural landscape, how it developed. And we should always be aware of the relation between those layers. And well, I wrote a book about 50 years of land reclamation in the Netherlands. As you might know, that more than 50% of the Dutch landscape was redesigned, especially for agricultural purposes, to make the land function better, to relocate farms, to improve the water system. And it really helped farming, but it changed the landscape, and it also affected nature in many ways. But I learned a lot about that history, and landscape-based landscape architecture was developed when these projects started. And Professor Bijhouwer, he was I think for me, he was one of the first people who developed an approach. How can you make landscape plans for areas that are maybe 10,000 or 20,000 hectares? And how can you come to make a plan of what kind of design principles can you use? And he was also famous for his books and his writings and his lectures, and he was actually also one of the first who made like a landscape typology of the Netherlands. And these landscape typologies, they were based on the soil, coastal landscapes, river landscapes, sandy landscapes, and the way they were occupied by people. And that was also a very important source of inspiration. And well, the land reclamation of Walcheren, it's the coastal landscape in Zeeland, south of Rotterdam, and it's a tidal landscape, so it was a reclaimed landscape. We reclaimed those landscapes by occupying the land, building dikes, small dikes. And here you see in the height map on for me on the right side, well, there you see clearly, you see the creeks and the land that's in between, and the land that's in between is much lower, and it's more clay land and peatland, and with a higher water table. So most villages and most farms, they own the higher creeks, and this landscape was a very small scale landscape, and it had to be improved for agriculture, so it has to be, they wanted to rationalize the landscape. There also was a big flooding because of the Second World War. the English, they bombed the dikes of this land, and it was completely flooded, and the whole landscape had to be restored. And the landscape plan was mainly based on these creeks. And what they did, what Bijhouwer did, and his co-followers like Nico de Jonge, they planted the trees on those creeks. So they created like architectural landscape where the creeks, they were more changed into more intimate landscapes, and the open areas in between, they were more the spaces, and they were defined by those creeks and the landscape, and they developed the whole planting system. Here are some old pictures of this landscape. They planted in the coastal area. They also planted a lot of hedges. And here you see what we call the Poelen, the lower laying areas, as open agricultural areas. And in another land reclamation that was done a little bit later, it was called the Poelheinkenschap. We have a similar principle. And here you see that the open part, the lower laying area, was kept open, a lot of grassland there. And the higher situated folders with the dikes, they were planted. And what is very funny, or funny, it's not so funny, but it's interesting, that the way they were drawing at that time. And I think I like it very much. And they use the dikes, they are planted, and you see the black, it's with this chalk, I don't know, chalk was drawn, and they used black for trees, and maybe most people, they use green to show that there are trees, it's green. They wanted to emphasize on the architectural effect of plantations. And here you see also a new recreational forest that's also based on Old Creek. It's also drawn in black. And here you see the division in the landscape of wide open spaces and more planted spaces. Landscape-based urbanism was also in Holland. First time I heard about this was when I found an old magazine, and it's called Boor en Spade, and it was a magazine about drilling and shoveling. And it was a magazine that was published in Wageningen by the people who did the soil mapping, the soil surveys, and they were mapping the whole of the Netherlands to support the land reclamation projects. Because if you had a good soil survey and good soil maps, it was easier to draw up the plans. And also, when you had to exchange land, farmers, and you had to know what's the type of land we exchange, what's the value for agriculture. And Professor Bijhouwer, he invited another professor who was in charge of the soil mapping. And he said, I have a request to look at the urban development in Schiedam, it's a small town, Ketel, and I want to use the soil research on, this is the magazine. I want to use a very good soil research to base the plan on. And that was, I thought, when I saw that article, when I read that article, I found it by occasion. I thought, well, this is very interesting how this developed actually. And this is Ketel, very small town. It's was very close to Schiedam, Rotterdam, and now Rotterdam developed. But the plan he made was based on the soil survey. And well, without talking about the plan, he tried to base the plan on the soil mapping and all the research that was being done. And he quoted in this article, he said the attractiveness of this plan to me lies in the fact that the logical, pleasant division of garden, village, and parks was attained by following the natural data as closely as possible. And that the result became something that could never have arisen from the designers. Then there's a word, I don't know, the English word, but it's what we call form-bill. If you are designing, you make drawings and you make forms, but if you see natural forms, it's very hard to reach that quality in form. And so he said, if you base your plan on the topography of the landscape, so you have a natural way of making the plan. He said another thing that was very important, and that's very important for bio-based solutions, is that the soil, the water is it's determining plant life and vegetation. And so if you want to know what you can plant in different landscape types of different areas, you have to know something about the soil and the climate and everything. Now I make a big leap to Venice, the Venice Lagoon, because I think Venice is a very great example of the Venice Lagoon, of like organic landscape urbanism. And the Lagoon of Venice is really big. It's 50,000 hectares. It's like close to Markermeer Lake here in Holland. You see the tidal landscape behind the shores, behind the dunes. You see the creeks coming in. You see the tidal plates, the higher areas. And if you then, this is the aerial photograph of the Lagoon of Venice. And in the lagoon, you have the Adriatic Sea, then you come into the lagoon, then you come into the city of Venice, and you have the Grand Canal. And so you have a big sequence of different water scales, actually. And Venice is like, I think, the city that's most integrated with the tidal landscape. And I've never seen something like this anywhere else, actually. If there is another example, I really want to. No, maybe. The Grand Canal. So this water is the sea, it's the lagoon, it's the Grand Canal, it's the smaller channels coming in. And here you see a small island in the lagoon. There also a smaller village. This is the top view of Venice, and you see the tidal landscape is the city. It's in the city, and the city is very much shaped by the tidal landscape and the place that were there that could be occupied. And I find that very inspiring because. And it also makes me think of why can't we make cities like this anymore? As beautiful as Venice, because there we have a lot of lagoons, but like in Holland, these tidal areas, they're protected, and they're protected by Natura 2000, so there's nothing you can do there. This is the Murano. It's one of the villages that's close to Venice. You can take the water taxi there. And here you also see the tidal creeks as the base of the city structure. Amsterdam is also an example of landscape urbanism, but it's not. Like Venice is an example of integration, like the city is following the rules of the tidal landscape. But in Amsterdam, Its origins from the Amstel River. They made a dam in the river, and they had to lead the water around the dam. And here you see how it developed and how the Amsterdam, the center of Amsterdam, created its canals around the city. And this is not based on the landscape, but it's interacting with the landscape. It's actually, this pattern is juxtaposed on the landscape, and it's working together with it. And it uses the same language, like the language of the canal and the ditch. And so this is how Amsterdam became a water city. Very beautiful. But here it's a different way of dealing with the landscape. You don't follow the landscape as it is, but you add something to the landscape and create a new reality, and both systems work together. And here you see how it's nicely situated in the landscape. At some point, like in the development of Amsterdam, this is the famous plan that was made by Van Lohuizen and Van Eest just before the Second World War, the Westelijke Thuisnede. They were thinking about how people should live, about the division of urban areas and green, and it's also influenced by the Siam ideas. But it was very theoretical, and it was completely not related to the landscape. This is an example of ignoring the existing landscape. There's nothing of the original landscape that you can recognize in those plans. And I'm not saying that these plans were not good, but I just focus on the landscape and think the landscape is not used here to what it could be. And then if you look at like another development of Amsterdam in the 60s, then you see here a historical map of the 19th century, and you see this very in polar landscape with these small streams and rivers. You see lakes, and one of the lakes is called Bijlmermeer, and the lake was reclaimed after some time. But this landscape was drawn by Rembrandt van Rijn. He liked to go out of the town and to make drawings of Amsterdam and of the rural landscape. And what I see is the landscape is very rich in details, and the horizon is very interesting. You see the boats, you see the windmills, you see the streams, and it's a very vulnerable landscape. The soil, it's peat landscape, it's very vulnerable. You have to be careful with landscapes like this. And when Amsterdam, here you see that the Bijlmermeer polder is reclaimed. So it's the lower laying area, but they had to develop a whole system of ditches, and they have to pump it constantly. And they developed the Bijlmermeer, the urban development, large-scale development based on the ideas of Le Corbusier. Actually, this is kind of desertification, maybe you can call it like this. They were covering the whole landscape with sand all the way. And these vulnerable lines, these small ditches and things, they were completely erased. And so the landscape was completely ignored and was built without taking notice of the very nice features that were already there. It would have been used. And well, the whole urban development of Bijlmermeer was not so successful, unfortunately. It was one of our biggest problematic urban developments. But it's an example of, like, if you are there, you could be everywhere. You cannot, there's nothing there that makes you, that shows you what kind of landscape it really was before. It's just a created landscape, and there's no connection anymore with the past. Which I think, if you look at the history of, like, the Amsterdam center, you see all these lines in history. You can read them in the city. You can discover them, and you can understand how it developed. And here you can also understand how it developed on the drawing table, based on a theory, but not based on the landscape. And they just filled the whole city. Well, this is also a drawing that came from the landscape plan of Walcheren, and this is a way, like Amsterdam, I called it, was like a juxtaposed pattern on the existing landscape. This is the place where they bombed the dikes. And so this creek system is completely, it developed after the bombing because of the water was coming in, and it was what was left. And the landscape architect, he could have, the soil was just not so good anymore because it was very rough and sandy. So they asked the landscape architect Nico de Jonge to make a plantation or a planting landscape plan. And he could have followed the creeks, like the lines of the creeks. He could have done it, but he did not do it. He made his own pattern, and he tried to also keep the relations with the surrounding landscape. And you also see here the use of black color. And here I think it's a game between open and closed, between the forested creeks and open creeks. And that's also a way that you can deal with the landscape, but give it another touch, and don't follow it by a rule, but just create a new landscape which is totally in balance with the natural starting point. This is how it looks like now. This is another example of, everybody knows Falling Waters from Frankfurt Wright, and it's a way the architect he made this design on the stream, and he used the stream to make a new reality by combining the house with the water, and the water is coming through the house, and it's also an example of, like, how you can create new qualities without following the landscape completely, but just adding something to the landscape. And I think this is one of the most outspoken examples of doing that. We made a regional plan for the 3 cities. It's called the Steden Trio, the city trio, triangle. It's Apeldoorn and Delft to Zutphen. Delft to Zutphen are situated on the IJssel river banks, and they are trading cities, all trading cities. And in the context of room for the river, there was a plan to make more space for the river and to create bypasses also based on historical patterns. And but because we also had a urban development program for this area, we suggested to combine urban development with making the bypasses and changing the landscape and creating a new interaction between the river and housing and create like very nice environments. Well, these are very historic cities. Here you see Deventer. You see you can see the old forms. You can recognize the old forms of the river. That is now much more positioned in between dikes. But the IJssel had much more space before, and we thought, well, this is how it looks, the city of Deventer. This is Zutphen. It's a similar situation. Here you also see the old creeks of the river. And we try to also develop like different environments, like different habitats with shallow water, deep water, isolated water, dunes, river dunes, river forests, swamps, etc. And we developed like urban typologies we could use in those environments and create like a very much landscape, river-based environment. And what you see here is that the IJssel, like the discharge of the water, is like in the summer it can be very little. So what you see on the left side is like more summer situation. And in the spring or in the winter, it can flood a lot. And then the landscape changes completely. And the housing plans, they just integrate in that landscape. And I think this would be a great interaction between nature, water management, and urban development. But it was very difficult to convince the Ministry of Water and Infrastructure, because they have this focus on water safety, and it's water safety and water safety and water safety, and they are not water safety, and they find it very difficult to think in like multifunctional concepts. And we all know if you can make a plan that's very multifunctional, has different meanings, that you are working on quality. But, well, not in Deventer and Zutphen. Another plan that's I think really landscape based. It's in Hoek of Holland. It's not so far. It's where the Waterweg goes to Rotterdam. It's also the village where I grew up as a child. And this dune area was created when they were making new harbors in the Rotterdam area. They created this new dune landscape, and it looks very natural. It's part of Natura 2000. It's protected, but it's completely man-made. They had to go somewhere with the soil and the sand, so they thought, well, maybe we can create this nice dune landscape. And this is the location. And they wanted to build houses, like they wanted to create like a new seaside resort for Rotterdam there. And there was a big competition, and we worked on the competition. We won the competition, cooperated with architects also. And we developed a plan that was really based on the landscape. In the historical situation, there were dunes in Hoek of Holland that we called haakduinen, and they are like haakduinen are dunes that bend to the river side. So, like you have the dunes that are part of the beach and the sea, and when the river comes into the sea, you also get dunes that are connected to the river. But this is completely gone. So we thought, if we build houses, we are not going to build a dike and put the houses behind in this landscape. We create new dunes, create this form of bending back to the river and use that as a base for the landscape design. And it also developed into into a, what we call a cape. We call it cape de Goede Hoek. Hoekgevallen. Kaap de Goede Hoek. And this is how it looks like, and it's a new seaside resort with a hotel and apartments and villas and high-rise buildings integrated in the dune landscape. And if you step out of your house, you are on the beach. You step out your house, you're in the dunes. And we could realize a lot of functions like parking spaces, storage spaces. We can integrate them in the dune landscape. We did all the ecological research to not to harm the existing vegetation. And we also, the plan of the Rotterdam was initially to build big apartment buildings along the waterway. And we said, well, we want to just build the high-rise buildings more on the top of the mountains or the dunes, and have the smaller houses closely to the water. So we actually make the effect of the dunes stronger by building them. So that's an urban design principle that's, for instance, also if you go to Reykjavik, you have fjords and you have higher areas, and all the higher areas are urbanized, and the highest buildings are on the highest parts. So you accentuate the topography. Well, these are some examples of how you can use the landscape or can be inspired by the landscape. And this is the project also Stefan mentioned, the Mark of Wadden. And here we had to build a nature reserve into the lake. And the lake is, do I still have some time or 5 minutes? The lake is very turbid. There are no gradients between the deeper water to the shallow water. There are no reeds, no nothing. So it's ecologically it's almost dead. So we had to develop a principle for how to build land with silt and sand from the location itself. And we thought, what can be our leading theme, or how can we be what can be the guidelines for our design, because it's all water all around. And we saw some designs that they made before for studying what could be possible, and they were all like they had this atoll shape, circular shape, like because you have to build dams or dikes, you have to fill it with material, and then the circle is the most efficient shape to do that. But then it's shapeless. All the sides are the same. And we thought, well, why don't we look at the wind? We have to create shelter for the wetlands we want to make. So we thought, well, we make new dunes on the windy side. So there's one on the southwest, one on the northwest, and these dunes, they are the front of the area, and they protect the land behind. And so it has identity, because what you see if you arrive there, it's the dunes, and behind the dunes, it's the surprise, it's the wetlands. And that's a landscape principle that you also see on the northern islands in the Netherlands. You have the sea, you have the dunes, and behind the dunes there are the tidal areas. And here we don't have any tide, but we have like wind, and the wind pushes the water to one side of the lake. And so the market water can flood when there's a strong wind, and when the wind goes down, the water goes away again, and that creates like dynamics. And this is the plan, and you see the dunes here. We also wanted to make a nature area where you can go and where you can enjoy to be there, to enjoy nature, because also if you create possibilities for people to experience nature areas, they always also want to support it. If they can go there, they are not willing to support it. So we made the harbor. We had Fritz Palmboom and Frans Ziegler. They made a plan for a settlement, which is also completely integrated in the landscape. It's inspired on the, maybe you know, Sea Ranch in California, which is also like a place where the buildings are very much integrated in the dune landscape and the coastal landscape. This is the plan. This is the way how the ecological processes work. So how we can make use of the processes. So this is also, I think, it's new land. It was a big piece of water, but using the processes that are there and using the prevailing winds, we could just well, we have a story about how this landscape should have been made. And of course, there was a big program about what kind of habitats we should develop. So here we give that information. And it's there's a lot of people going there now and enjoy the nature. This is the harbor with the settlement. And this is the visitor center where you can sit on the beach, and it's very difficult to. This was not there a few years ago. It's like it has always been there, but it was not there. It was just a lake, and we tried also to make architectural elements like this view tower, which makes it a it's a human scale, and you can overlook the whole area. It's based on, it's an abstract bird, actually. It has the feathers in the cover, and the head is turned. What birds can do, we cannot do it, but birds can. They can look the other way. And so this is that's also the kind of architectural addition to a nature landscape, and therefore it becomes more special. And this is the view you'll see from the tower. We make boardwalks to people to make it possible for people to go really into the wetlands. We have birdhouses on different levels. So this is the birdhouse where you go all the way down and you can look at the water qualities, you can make a photograph of a fish, and you see all the birds diving into the water. And this is the beautiful light that's always there because of the reflecting skies and the water and the different colors. And so this is my last slide, I think. What in the landscape-based approach, if it's on landscape architecture or if it's on landscape or urban development or architecture, I think you can. It's always very good to use the existing landscape. It's also functional. It's ecological. It's the genius loci, which is always somewhere also in the soil and water system. The biodiversity is also rooted in that system. And I think especially for landscape architects, their task is to fully understand this system, to use it. And you can use it in many different ways. You can really follow it, like in Venice, I think the city followed the tidal landscape, and all the shapes you see in the urban landscape are from that tidal landscape. But you can also create new landscapes that have a relation with the existing landscape. Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
In your example, you used the Venice Lagoon. I think it's also a really nice city, but right now it's also facing climate change, and it's a city who has been living with the water for its beginning, is now also at the same time drowning out. Do you think then within the city that's always been living with water, there's also still a possibility to adapt? Or do you think it's too fixed?
Yeah, I'm fully aware of the. I was actually expecting this question, and I think the exciting part of living in Venice is that the water to deal with it. It's also good for people to work together. And no, but seriously, I think of course they took measurements. They closed the open. They have like a kind of system that they can close the entrances to the lagoon. And I think it's a very serious problem. And I don't know, I have no solution, otherwise I was up there. But what I like about it, that living in such an environment gives like so many qualities. And like the Venice Lagoon is 50,000 hectares. On the map, you don't, I showed the whole map of the lagoon, you don't see Venice at all. Just a small spot. And I showed it because I think, like in the Dutch River District, it's also very difficult to propose new urban developments. Well, everybody wants to live at the riverside. Everybody wants to see the flowing water, see the water rise, going down. And you have to do it in a safe way. And of course, Venice is a very historic city. So they now have to think about measurements. But like in Holland, we built most of our cities also on places where we are under sea level, and now 1 or 2 meters. Parts of Amsterdam are like 4 or 5 meters. Rotterdam even worse. And I think we can adapt, like as with our knowledge, and we can adapt to those circumstances.
Yeah, actually, that is also maybe a more fundamental question, because you say actually that in a landscape-based approach, ecological processes and dynamics are important. So on the one hand, you have the structures, and on the other hand, you have the processes. So some of the examples you showed, let's say, in a way, kind of ways to superimpose or to integrate from a formal structural point of view, you can say. But what about the processual side of things? And that's exactly where Venne was referring to. Venice as a concept is maybe very much based upon the logic of the lagoon and its dynamics. But the question is, how does it live with changes? So therefore, I think it would also be very interesting to develop ways to adapt with the changes of the landscape, because the landscape in itself is also a living entity. So the question is, can we combine this kind of developmental aspect into our urban planning? What do you think? Because in a way it looks like, okay, we have a form and we can, of course, be inspired by natural forms, the landscape as it is, and we can incorporate certain structures. But can we go, let's say, one step further in order to also to change with the landscape, if you like? What do you think? Is that possible? Or what are ways to investigate or explore that idea?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Do you think it's a fruitful way to move forward, or is it just like what you say, formula?
I think there's, what I find interesting is that Venice is there. It's there, and we're not going to take it down.
Yes.
We're not going to demolish it. We're not going to replace Amsterdam to the higher parts of Holland. So, with the knowledge we have now, we should have built Venice, I think, or Venice had developed differently. But now we have to deal with the situation as it is. And I think it's very good to anticipate on like climate change and to not to start to live on places that will give a lot of problems in the future. But I think it's also very interesting that we have built on so many places already that are below sea level, that are maybe not the most safe places. And so the challenge is to deal with it and to also use landscape-based design to protect those cities and keep them functioning. And that will take measurements, and we have to protect the lagoon, and maybe we have to do other things in the future. I don't know, but I think now we also don't know that the things we do now, we don't know if it's good 200 years from now. We totally don't know. So what we think now is good and wise, in 200 years, it would be very stupid. And like we are very proud on our Dutch ways to deal with water. We built the Afsluitdijk, we built the Deltawerken, all the protective measurements. But we also see that it, for the ecosystem, was not that great. Not great at all. Actually, if you look at the Zuiderzee, the tidal system there, the way the river deltas were there, the nature that was there, is completely destroyed. And now we have projects like Markenwadden. We try to restore nature, and we do, and it's a nice area. You should go there. But for me, it's also now, like we did those projects, like the Afsluitdijk was 1930, I think, 1930 something. The Deltawerken, they were even like the end of the last century, we built them. And now Oosterschelde, for instance, was a tidal system. We have an open system, we can close, but it's not working. And we thought this was the solution. It was actually keeping the tidal system by making a dam with doors. They're always open till the sea gets too wild. So I think we should not think that we can. We try to look ahead. But we're only human beings. Yeah. And human beings, they make a lot of mistakes. All the time. And they will do that 200 years from now also. But of course, you like the farmers, where were they building their farms? They were looking at the landscape. They were looking, what's the best place to build my farm? I don't want any flooding. I want to see my cows. I want to have some corn on the field. So they knew exactly where to build. but they never knew about climate change and rising water problems we have now, and all river systems that flood, also in the eastern part of the country. So we have to be a little bit humble when it comes to all these measurements, I think. And yeah, if you want, I think that the people are always living on dangerous places, and for a reason, because there's food, there's water you can use for transportation. If you are very careful, you don't leave your home, you stay inside. And I think that's also with urban development. I think we have to also maybe look for challenging environments.
Maybe just to react to this though, because if I'm seeing your start and what Stefan started with, there is a different situation now. As a landscape-based urbanism might be a different situation in that it now can understand the system and can see things with data and with understandings and different approaches, which is different than beforehand. So hopefully, I'm assuming we won't be making continual mistakes in the next 200 years. Couldn't you say that's like some of the work is starting to is a new way of looking at things, which is hopefully a little bit in any case more studied, so there will be slightly less number of mistakes? Or is that just too optimistic?
Yeah, I think making plans, executing plans, live in the plans, you learn a lot, of course, and you take all the lessons learned you use for creating new environments. And I think we developed plans for the deeper polders, the lakes that were reclaimed and that are 5 meters under sea level. There are a lot of them are built. A lot of Phoenix like urban developments were located in those deeper polders. And I think I did not show it because I had too much already. But if you look at Eiberg, maybe I don't know if you all know Eiberg, but it's a new neighborhood in Amsterdam that's built in the water, in the IJmuiden. And so we create land like Markerwadden out of the water. Like if you follow that approach in those reclaimed areas, that you consider that this was a lake. So what I'm actually doing is building in a lake. So what you do is you build like you raise the land with sand, and you fill it. You don't build it. You can't completely build it, but you fill it with water again. And that's the reverse of what they did in Eiberg. They took water to make new urban development, and it's a very nice environment and beautiful design. But you can also fill these reclaimed areas with water again and combine that with urban development. And then you have like a lot of water, which is cooling down the city, which gives it a recreational aspect and makes the land a lot safer. And we have like our water system, like in the western part of the Netherlands, doesn't have enough flexibility because they have fixed water levels and they have to be fixed because they are like, otherwise they will flood. If you enlarge that water body with these lakes, which is not that difficult, you create much more flexibility for flooding in the western part of Holland. And you create nice recreational, ecological environments to live. So there is, you can learn from things, and you can improve things, and but it's very difficult, I think, for the government to take those steps. We also proposed a dune landscape in the Haarlemmermeer, and because they wanted to have water retention. And if you have water retention, you have to fill an area with water, you have to build dikes, and then when you need the water, it's evaporating a lot. It's because that's in the summer. So you need a lot of space for water retention. When you want to use it in a recreational way, the water level goes down and you want to use it in the other part of the folder. So we propose, why don't we make dune landscapes in the folder? And then we can go above sea level. We can store a lot of water in the dunes because the dunes are natural water storages. You can also make that stronger to build like dikes in the dunes. So you get a reservoir filled with sand, and in the sand you can store the water. It doesn't evaporate anymore because it's in the sand. You can have a lot of functions integrated in the dunes, but it's a total different way of looking at landscape, and it's a bridge too far for most people. And we had project developers who wanted to build this, but the government says, oh, dunes, they don't fit in the polder. And of course, yeah, they don't fit in the polder. It's strange, but it works very well. So, yeah, I think we can create a lot of innovations, but not everybody is ready. We are doing the things like we are used to, and we are just appointing that, oh, this will be a new neighborhood, put some meter, 1 meter 50%, and just build whatever you want to build.
This is a good advice to this future, most of you are future generation planners and designers. Make use of this inspiration and propose new innovative ideas. So please give him a hand.